I walked through the heavy oak doors of St. Helena's Church with my heart doing something it hadn't done in years, tremble. The smell of incense wrapped around me like a memory I didn't ask for, thick and cloying. My gray suit was freshly pressed, tailored for this exact day, and my shoes still held a bit of shine from the polish I applied that morning. I came prepared, not just in dress, but in spirit. After all, today was my daughter's wedding. Alara, the girl I had raised since she was 6, after her biological father, Grant, had disappeared into the kind of silence only cowards seem to perfect. I remembered helping her with multiplication tables, bandaging her knees, sitting through tear-stained teenage heartbreaks. I didn't just help raise her, I gave her my everything. And somewhere in the quiet corners of my mind, I expected that to mean something today. The ushers wore gold-trimmed sashes and soft expressions, the kind meant to usher joy and not tension. One of them nodded at me with a kind smile as I walked down the center aisle, scanning the first few rows for my name. I didn't expect fanfare. I didn't need a spotlight. But I had assumed, at the very least, that I'd be seated among family. The row marked Reserve caught my eye first. Elegant name cards were set neatly on velvet-lined chairs. I bent slightly, reading them. Marisol, Grant, Talia. I froze. Grant, her ex-husband, and Talia, his new wife. Neatly placed together like they had been the ones who raised her. Like I was just a shadow they forgot to pull into the light. No mention of me. My throat tightened, the kind of tightness that comes when dignity collides with disbelief. I looked around, hoping maybe there was another section, perhaps a row with my name just waiting to be discovered. But no, just those 3 names. 3 people who had been strategically positioned in the front row of Alara's new chapter. My name didn't belong in the front anymore. It didn't belong anywhere. I wasn't her father, not today. I was just a man in a tailored suit, clinging to ghosts. Marisol caught my gaze. Her expression flickered for half a second, guilt, maybe, or discomfort. She looked away quickly, pretending to adjust her necklace. That was her tell. I used to watch her do it whenever she lied to her sister about skipping dinner or hiding a purchase. Alara emerged from the far hallway, her dress a soft cream that made her look angelic under the church lights. My heart fluttered involuntarily. For a moment, just a sliver of time, I wanted to believe this was still our moment. That she'd look up, see me, smile the way she used to when I brought home surprise ice cream or stayed up late helping with college essays. But she didn't look at me. Her eyes were fixed straight ahead. On Grant. On the man who once left her without explanation, now standing proudly, ready to walk her down the aisle like he'd never vanished. My mouth went dry. The weight of that irony hit me square in the chest. I felt it deeper than I expected, in a place that still hadn't quite healed from years of swallowing disappointment for the sake of love. The organ music swelled. Everyone stood. I stayed seated for a moment longer, heart pounding, the urge to walk out rising with every note. But I didn't move. I couldn't, not yet. I walked slowly to the back, avoiding eye contact. The only open seat was beside the sound technician, a kid in a faded black shirt hunched over knobs and wires. He gave me a polite nod, clearly unaware he was sitting beside the man who once tucked the bride in every night for over a decade. I sat down, the chair uneven, the air colder. From this vantage point, everything felt distant. The vows were a faint hum. The laughter, a muffled echo. People whispered and smiled and cried, and I sat in silence, next to a stack of coiled cables and an unplugged microphone. I was unplugged too. It hit me then, not as a sudden blow, but as a gradual unraveling. I wasn't just forgotten. I was removed. Deliberately. With intention. They didn't forget to include me. They chose not to. I wasn't family. I was a fixture. Something that had served its purpose and could now be gently set aside without drawing too much attention. My love had been consistent, unwavering. But that love had become an accessory. Useful only until the real father was ready to return and reclaim the title he'd once abandoned. The ceremony ended. Applause rose. Cameras flashed. People clapped like love had triumphed, like the reunion between daughter and biological father was something noble. I remained in the shadows, watching, breathing slowly, holding on to the last shreds of composure I had left. I watched Grant kiss her on the forehead. I watched Marisol beam beside him, the picture of a family restored. And I watched Talia, a woman I'd met twice, embrace Alara like they had history. Like I hadn't been the one who taught her how to drive, cried during her graduation, or waited outside her first job interview with a milkshake in hand. The aisle emptied. I waited until the last of the crowd had funneled into the reception hall before I stood. One of the ushers glanced at me, about to offer a program or perhaps a word of thanks, but thought better of it. I suppose I looked like a man trying not to fall apart. I adjusted my tie, suddenly too tight. Walked outside. The sun was bright, too bright for the way I felt. The sound of celebration echoed faintly behind me as I stood on the church steps, unsure of where to go next. That's when it settled inside me, quietly but with finality. I wasn't family anymore. I was a footnote. A chapter closed without warning. A seat left unassigned. I gave my love freely, thinking it earned me a place at the table. But they had unplugged me, quietly, cleanly, as if I were a wire they no longer needed. And now, I had to figure out what to do with all the love they no longer wanted. I've worked with locks for 22 years. Not just the kind you twist open with a key, but the electronic ones too, the digital panels that flash green when you enter the right code and go red when you don't. I manage properties for a living. Everything from duplexes to high-end condos. My job is simple: fix what's broken, prevent what's avoidable, and always have the master key. Locks are honest. Either they click open, or they don't. There's no ambiguity. No shifting goalposts. No gaslighting. I built my life around those simple mechanics. People, on the other hand, they lie. And they lie well. Charles was Alara's new husband. Or is, I suppose. He's the type you can't quite trust, but can't fully dislike either. The kind who smiles too big, tips generously, and talks with his hands like a motivational speaker. I never liked him. I tolerated him for Alara's sake. And when she said they were struggling to cover some of the wedding costs, I nodded, opened my checkbook, and quietly made things easier. I paid for the florist, the champagne tower, the band that played soft jazz and modern covers. I arranged for the luxury transportation. I never asked for credit. I never even hinted at it. I didn't want my name in the program. I just wanted to give my daughter something beautiful, something that matched the love I'd carried for her every single day since I first walked her to school, holding her hand and telling her she was strong. But that wedding made it clear none of that mattered. My love had been repackaged as obligation. My presence, trimmed down to he helped. It was Charles and Grant who got the praise. Grant, the absentee, and Charles, the honeymoon husband. I wasn't even a second thought. I was a shadow in the back pew beside the sound tech, holding emotions like they were napkins too soaked to use again. So I left. Not loud. Not bitter. Just quiet. While they posed for pictures in a garden I paid to reserve, I walked back to my car. A silver Ford Fusion with leather seats and a broken rear-view camera I hadn't gotten around to fixing. I sat in the driver's seat with the engine off, breathing in the silence like it was oxygen. My phone buzzed. Messages. Probably from Marisol, maybe even Alara. I didn't check. Not because I didn't care, but because I cared too much, and I knew those words would only pour salt into wounds already beginning to weep. I unlocked my phone, opened my property management folder, and scrolled until I found it. Ashgrove Gardens Reception Hall. Lease signed 6 weeks ago. By me. Paid in full for the night. Non-refundable deposit, security staff, catering. I handled all of it. In Charles's name, but under my power. I called the main number and asked to speak to Diane, the manager I'd worked with. She recognized my voice immediately. Mr. Rivera, how can I help you? Everything good for tonight, see? Cancel it, I said calmly. A beat. Then 2. Excuse me. The reception. It's under Charles Godwin, but the lease is mine. Effective immediately, it's canceled. Close the doors. Pack the food. Let the band go. Sir, the guests are already arriving. I mean, there are hundreds of people expected. I understand. I hung up before she could ask another question. There was no anger in my chest. Just clarity. The kind of clarity that arrives after too much noise. I didn't scream. I didn't plot. I just ended it. Like a lock turning into place. Simple. Clean. I turned the ignition, backed out of the parking lot, and drove with the windows down. The wind wrapped around my face like a bomb. Let them wonder. Let them call it cruel. Let them say I was petty. I had held my breath for over a decade. This was me exhaling. My phone lit up again, buzzing with fury and confusion. Alara's name. Marisol's. Even Charles's. I turned it face down. I'd spent years being the man who fixed things. The one who filled the gaps, plugged the leaks, covered the silence with acts of love they never saw. But this wasn't a broken pipe or a faulty lock. This was betrayal. And betrayal doesn't get bandaged. It gets cut off. By the time I got home, it was dark. The porch light flickered, a reminder I hadn't changed the bulb. I stepped into the house, ours, though it already felt like someone else's. Marisol's scarf was still on the hook. The scent of her lilac perfume still lingered in the hallway. Upstairs, the closet was packed with both our things, but only hers felt like they belonged anymore. I didn't bother turning on the lights. I sat in the living room, letting the darkness wrap around me. My hands were steady, my chest quiet. There was no satisfaction in what I'd done, only balance. I leaned back and closed my eyes. The image of Alara walking down the aisle without a glance in my direction played again and again in my head. Her smile, Brand's hand on her arm, Marisol dabbing her eyes like they still worked in harmony. They didn't just forget me. They erased me, edited me out like a rough draft. But I was the one who held the final draft, and I signed it with silence. Later that night, I walked through the house and looked at everything differently. The fridge magnets shaped like stars Alara made in 3rd grade. The bookshelf where Marisol's cookbooks gathered dust. The hallway mirror where I used to straighten my tie before work. This wasn't home. Not anymore. It was a holding cell of memories. And I was already turning the key. The morning after the wedding, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. It sat face down on the kitchen counter, vibrating like a trapped insect against the wood. Missed calls, texts, voicemails. Notifications stacked higher than my appetite for explanations. I didn't touch it. I let it hum itself into silence, like a guest overstaying its welcome. The house was still dark, blinds drawn, morning sun politely waiting to be let in. But I didn't move. I just stared at the coffee brewing, steam rising in lazy spirals. Everything felt too loud, even the silence. Around 10, I finally glanced at the screen. 22 missed calls. Marisol, Alara, Charles. Even the church's event planner had tried. The last text was short. From Alara. What happened? No punctuation. No warmth. No recognition of the weight behind the question. Just those 2 words, like a pebble tossed into a canyon, expecting a splash. I blocked the number. It wasn't out of cruelty. It was self-preservation. There comes a point where explanations become performative, like begging someone to notice the wound while they hold the knife. I wasn't about to pour myself out again only to watch them sip and spit. I gave them years. Let them finish sentences with silence while I filled the gaps with understanding. I was done explaining. 3 days passed. I didn't go into work. I didn't check the news. I didn't open the blinds. I sat with myself in a house that no longer felt like mine, surrounded by echoes of a life I had apparently imagined. I finally sat at my desk, opened my laptop, and composed a message. It wasn't emotional. It wasn't angry. It was precise, sterile, even. Marisol always said I was too clinical when things got hard. Maybe she was right. Maybe I had learned to survive by boiling emotion down to paperwork and process. The email subject line read, regarding closure. The message itself was simple. Marisol, attached is a scanned PDF of our divorce paperwork. I've signed everything. No alimony. No contest. No revisions. Please have it notarized and returned. Regards, C. I attached the document and hit send. There were no metaphors. No passive-aggressive barbs. Just closure, cold, final, documented. I didn't expect a reply. But she called instead, less than 10 minutes after the email went out. Her name lit up the screen like a curse I'd just spoken out loud. I let it ring. She tried again. Then again. I sat perfectly still, watching it flash like a siren, refusing to answer. For years, I had been the one to chase calm, to talk her down from cliffs of her own making, to rewrite my boundaries so she could feel secure. But this time, my silence wasn't fear, it was a boundary. Sharp. Cold. Real. She left a voicemail. I didn't listen to it. I watched the seconds tick past on the screen until it ended. The last time I let her voice sway me, I ended up writing checks and clinging to titles she was already handing back to someone else. I know people think of divorce as a battle, a loud, messy spectacle. But this wasn't that. This was surgical. She never saw it coming because I didn't scream. I didn't throw things or beg her to remember the man who raised her daughter while her ex was finding himself. I was the quiet man. The reliable man. She called me predictable. Stable. Dependable. But I think what she really meant was ignorable. People underestimate what silence can do. Silence held the real power in our marriage. Silence was how she avoided uncomfortable conversations. Silence was how I forgave betrayals I barely had words for. Silence was the thread that pulled the whole illusion together. But now? Now silence was the scalpel I used to cut myself free. She never expected it. She thought I'd sit in the dark with my tail tucked, waiting for her to explain, waiting to be reassembled into a version she could tolerate again. But I wasn't waiting. That afternoon, I printed the divorce papers, signed every page with deliberate strokes, scanned them back into my system, and filed a digital copy under a new folder I named Restart. The name felt childish at first, like something a motivational speaker would use. But as the documents disappeared into cloud storage, I realized it was accurate. Not dramatic. Just honest. I didn't cry. I didn't drink. I didn't play sad music or scroll through old photos. I just sat still. And in that stillness, I realized something that chilled me. The marriage had ended a long time ago. Not with infidelity. Not with the wedding fiasco. But the moment she stopped protecting me in rooms I wasn't allowed to leave. The moment she let Grant re-enter without boundaries. When she smiled at Alara calling him Dad, again, and told me not to take it personally. She was right. I shouldn't have taken it personally. Because that would have required me to believe I was still a person in her life. Not a placeholder. Not a warm body. Just a man with a wallet and a calm voice. The doorbell rang once. I ignored it. Then twice. Persistent. I stood, walked to the peephole. A flower delivery. I opened the door. A single white lily in a narrow vase. The card read, "Can we talk? M." I didn't bring it inside. I left it on the porch. Let the wind decide where it belonged. That evening, I cooked dinner for one. Nothing extravagant, just pasta and some leftover roasted vegetables. I poured a glass of water, sat down, ate in silence. And for the first time in months, maybe years, the silence didn't feel like punishment. It felt like peace. And in that peace, I promised myself something simple. No more second places in rooms I helped build. No more shrinking myself to fit their comfort. I wasn't angry. I wasn't broken. I was just done. I was boxing up the last drawer in the study when I found it. The photo. A moment buried so deep in the past, it almost felt like fiction. Alara on my shoulders, 10 years old, arms outstretched like wings, laughing so hard I could feel it through the grain of the photograph. I was looking up at her in that picture, my face frozen mid-laugh. No tension in my brow, no storm behind my eyes. Just a man holding up his world. We were standing in the backyard of our old house, before the remodel, before Grant came back, before everything started cracking under the surface. I sat down with the photo in my hands. Not on the couch, on the floor, cross-legged like I used to sit when Alara built blanket forts and made me promise to stay until this story was over. I stared at the photo for longer than I meant to. There was something so honest in it. I wasn't smiling for the camera, I was smiling for her. Because I believed in what we had. Because I trusted that love, the kind you build with sweat and bedtime stories, actually meant something. It hit me all over again, how much I had poured into raising her. How many soccer practices I coached when no one else signed up. How many nights I waited in the car outside her piano lessons because she liked seeing me first when she came out. How I kept her old sketchbooks even when she said they were dumb middle school stuff. I had loved her with the kind of patience that doesn't demand attention, only presence. And now? Now I was a ghost haunting a house that still had my name on the mortgage. A ghost watching her call someone else Dad at the altar. I framed the photo, not to hold on to them, but to remember myself. I put it in a simple walnut frame, the kind I would have used for her senior portraits if they'd ever let me be part of that moment. I set it on the desk beside me. It wasn't for Alara. It wasn't for nostalgia. It was a reminder that I had loved, that I had tried, that I mattered once, even if only to myself. I kept packing, my hands slower now, more careful. Every object I touched was a reminder of a role I had stepped into with open arms, only to be told I wasn't needed after the curtains closed. There was the ceramic #OneDad mug she'd given me when she was 9, a Father's Day gift she made with her schoolteacher. I remembered the moment so clearly. How her tiny hands carried it with pride. How she made me promise never to drink coffee out of anything else. I left it on the counter. I wouldn't take it with me. That mug belonged to a version of me that no longer existed. As I boxed the last shelf, the memory of Grant started creeping in. Marisol had always spoken about him carefully, like you'd handle broken glass. She used to say, "He's not evil, just unfinished." I didn't question it at the time. I believed in second chances. But now I realized that she never stopped making space for him. Slowly, over the years, he showed up at birthdays, then school plays, Then her college visits. At first, I was the one holding the camera while he posed beside Alara, and Marisol called it co-parenting. Then I was the one fetching drinks while they laughed about inside jokes I was never part of. She told me I was being insecure. "It's for Alara," she said. "She deserves a full picture." I believed her. I told myself I could handle it. That love meant not flinching when history knocked on your front door and stayed for dinner. But I was wrong. I wasn't part of a picture. I was the backdrop. Something blurry behind the people they had decided were the real story. I remembered the first time Alara called him Dad again. It was at her scholarship dinner. I was so proud of her. I'd spend hours helping her with the application essays, proofreading them, coaching her through mock interviews. That night, she wore the gold bracelet I gave her when she graduated high school. And then, during her speech, she said, "I want to thank my dad, Grant, for always believing in me." The applause swallowed my shock. Marisol looked over at me, but didn't say anything. She squeezed my hand under the table like I was a child being told to behave. I smiled. I smiled because I didn't know what else to do. Now, I don't even know why I stayed after that. Maybe because leaving would have confirmed the fear that had been circling me for years, that I was a placeholder. That the love I gave had an expiration date stamped in invisible ink. The day of the wedding, it all came full circle. When they walked her down the aisle, Marisol and Grant, arm in arm, like a polished storybook family, I sat in the shadows. My name wasn't on the program. My name wasn't on her lips. But it was in every thread of that moment. I paid for her childhood, her teenage therapy, her braces, her camp trips, her first car. I paid in money, time, sacrifice, and care. And yet, when it was time to frame the memory, they cropped me out. I finished packing the last box and stood up. My knees cracked, a reminder that time had moved on even if the people I loved hadn't. I looked around the room one last time. Empty shelves. Just outlines where picture frames used to sit. The air already smelled different, like the room was forgetting me before I even closed the door. I picked up the framed photo. Alara, 10 years old, arms like wings. Me looking up at her with unguarded joy. I wasn't going to hide this memory. I wasn't going to shame myself for loving fully. They may have moved on, but I didn't disappear. They didn't erase me. They just don't get to keep me anymore. The day I moved out, the sun had the kind of chill behind it that didn't match the calendar. Early fall, but it felt like winter on the inside. Marisol was at her sister's house. A quick visit she'd said offhandedly the night before, still assuming I'd be there when she got back. She had no idea I'd already rented a one-bedroom at the edge of town. No clue that I'd been boxing up my life in careful layers. Books, documents, clothing, the photo of Alara on my shoulders now wrapped in a clean towel and tucked in the front seat of my car. I didn't slam a single drawer. Didn't break anything. I moved like a tenant, not a man leaving his own home. My wedding band was already off. Had been for weeks. I left it in the medicine cabinet behind her facial serums and the lavender-scented cream she never remembered to close properly. It would sit there, lost between bottles of aging routines, a symbol of how forgettable I'd become in the very life I helped build. I took what mattered. My books. A few tools. My old denim jacket with the frayed collar. I left behind anything sentimental. Not out of spite, but because it didn't belong to me anymore. The chipped, bonus dad mug stayed on the kitchen shelf, stained with years of Saturday morning coffee and silly stories. Alara gave it to me when she was 13. Back when we still laughed in the mornings and she'd sneak marshmallows into my cup. I stared at it for a long time, holding it with both hands like it was too fragile to put down. But eventually I did. Carefully, like a goodbye. The new apartment was nothing special. Small, neutral, quiet. The kind of place people rented when they were starting over or licking wounds. Beige carpet, white walls, a faint smell of fresh paint and dust. It didn't welcome or judge. It just existed. And that felt like a relief. No expectation to entertain. No calendar of family events taped to the fridge. No, we need to talk drifting down the hallway. Just me. I didn't bring a couch. Just a chair and 2 boxes to use as a table. I had a mattress on the floor and a standing lamp. That was enough. The photo of Alara and me went on the windowsill, facing out. Not so I could look at it, but so that the world could. A reminder that once I held joy. That once I mattered enough for someone to trust me with their full weight. I spent the first evening building a stool. Oak. Solid. Simple. I bought the wood weeks ago. thinking I'd make a bench for the garden Marisol never actually planted. But now it was mine. My project. No compromises, no silent sighs from the other end of the couch when I pulled out tools after dinner. Just the sound of sandpaper against wood and the rhythmic knock of a hammer. The stool turned out better than I expected, sturdy, even. Unlike people. As I worked, I noticed something I hadn't in years: stillness. The kind of stillness that comes not from absence, but from peace. No waiting for the front door to open. No bracing for questions that felt more like evaluations. Just quiet. I ate dinner standing up, store-bought soup and toast, and drank water from a glass I didn't have to share space within a dishwasher schedule. Then I sat on the stool, placed both feet flat on the floor, and just existed. That night, I slept deeply. No phantom arguments echoing through the walls. No dreams of being replaced at my own table. When I woke, the light pouring through the single-pane window felt like an apology from the world. Not grand. Just honest. I didn't text anyone. I didn't post some new beginnings photo or make a dramatic announcement. This wasn't a performance. This was me, returning to myself. Quietly. Deliberately. 2 days later, I drove back to the old house one last time to drop off my spare key in the mailbox. I parked across the street and sat there for a moment. The porch still had that ugly potted plant she insisted gave character, even though it always looked half dead. The front window was open, curtains swaying in the breeze. Life was going on inside without me. That should have hurt more than it did. I got out, walked slowly, and placed the key in a white envelope with my name written on it in block letters. No note. No explanation. Just an end. As I turned to leave, I saw the neighbor's kid, Max, riding his bike down the sidewalk. He waved, confused. I'd fixed his chain once when it snapped. Gave him a popsicle while he waited. I waved back, but didn't stop walking. Back in the apartment, I filled the space one item at a time, not with noise, but with purpose. A coat rack I made from reclaimed wood. A small shelf for the books I actually reread. A coffee mug I bought on a whim that just said, "Begin." It didn't have a history. It didn't need one. I drank from it each morning, sitting on the stool by the window, watching the street below come alive in slow, quiet ways. No one called. Marisol didn't reach out. Alara hadn't tried again. Maybe they thought I was being dramatic. Maybe they were too busy piecing their version of the story together. It didn't matter. Because in this new place, I wasn't chasing recognition. I wasn't hoping to be chosen again. I was reclaiming my space, my voice, my stillness. I didn't know what came next. I didn't have a 5-year plan or a new love interest or some epiphany about the meaning of it all. I just had a stool, a photo, and a room full of light I didn't have to earn. And for the first time in a very long time, that felt like enough. I didn't tell anyone what I was doing. Not Marisol. Not the handful of mutual friends who still followed me on social media out of habit. Not even my barber, who noticed the weight had shifted in my voice the last time I sat in his chair. I didn't owe explanations anymore. I was done narrating my pain for other people to edit. I moved through the world like a man turning pages in a book no one else wanted to finish reading. Quietly. Intentionally. The therapist's office was tucked between a dentist and a dry cleaner, unassuming like most places where real change starts. Her name was Dr. Anna Selby. I found her online after scrolling past a dozen smiling stock photo headshots that all felt like lies. But hers was different. No smile. No sales pitch. Just her credentials, her specialty in emotional displacement and identity reformation, and a single quote underneath: "We build what we believe we're allowed to have." That line gutted me, because I had spent the last decade building peace out of scraps, convincing myself a halfway kind of love was the only kind left. She didn't waste time. From the moment I sat down in the worn leather chair, she leaned forward like a woman who had no interest in small talk. "You're not here because they broke you," she said, flipping open a notepad. "You're here because you spent too long pretending you weren't cracking." I nodded, unsure whether to feel seen or exposed. Week after week, I went back. And I never once told anyone I was going. It felt sacred, something untouched by their opinions or justifications. I talked about the house, about Alara, about the wedding, about the silence, and about the moment Marisol stopped defending me, not with anger, but with that dismissive shrug she always gave when conflict knocked and she was too tired to answer. Dr. Selby said something once that stitched itself to my ribs. You can't heal in a story where you're still trying to be the hero for people who've already cast you as the villain. She looked up from her notes after saying it, watching my face like she was waiting for me to blink. but I didn't, because it landed too hard to miss. I had been trying to be everything. Supportive husband, bonus dad, provider, listener, the man who kept the peace even when the war was already over. I tried so hard to keep the family stitched together, I didn't notice when they were writing me out of the picture altogether. Around that time, I got a message from Alara. It came from a different number. Simple, almost childlike in its construction. If it felt wrong, I'm sorry. That if cut deeper than silence ever could. It told me she still didn't see it. That she thought pain was a matter of perspective, something subjective I could just shrug off if I wanted to. She didn't say she was sorry because she realized I'd been erased. She said it because it was convenient. Expected. The adult version of a child muttering sorry when told to apologize. I didn't reply. There was nothing to say that wouldn't be a repeat of all the things I'd swallowed for years. Instead, I poured that energy into something else. Rylan, my late brother's son, 19, restless. The kind of young man who didn't know how to ask for help, but hovered in the places where help often showed up. He'd lost his father at 14, and since then had bounced between schools, jobs, and fleeting attempts at independence. I'd kept in touch, but never stepped in. Not until now. Not until I saw him outside the corner hardware store, hands shoved into his hoodie pocket, eyes full of a question he didn't know how to form. You free for lunch? I asked, standing beside him in the parking lot. He blinked. No. I nodded. He followed me to a diner nearby. We didn't talk much at first. He ordered waffles. I got black coffee and a grilled cheese. Then, mid-bite, he asked, you ever feel like you're the extra in your own life? I didn't answer right away. Instead, I pulled out a napkin and scribbled something on it. A rough sketch. A table. For legs. One broken. This is what happens when we keep trying to sit at a table that won't hold us, I said. Eventually, it collapses, and they blame you for falling. That was the start. We began meeting weekly. No therapy language. No father figure speeches. Just tools. Wood. Hands on something that made sense. We built a table. Not a fancy one. Nothing worth photographing. Just strong, even, and ours. One Sunday, as we sanded the edges smooth, Rylan asked, so, you still talk to them? Your old people? I chuckled quietly. No, not really. Miss them? I paused. I miss who I thought they were. He nodded slowly, eyes scanning the surface of the oak. Yeah, I get that. We worked in silence after that. But it wasn't the silence I'd come from. This one was different. Comfortable. Two people choosing to exist beside each other without demands, without scripts. Later that night, I sat in my apartment, staring at the finished table. My hands smelled like cedar oil and sweat. I thought about the dinner parties I used to host, the birthday cakes, the thankless efforts, and how this simple table, built in a rented garage with a kid still figuring himself out, meant more than anything I'd constructed inside that house with Marisol. This table didn't lie. It didn't pretend. It didn't change names when someone else came along. It was just what it was. Like me. No longer waiting to be loved the way I gave it. No longer shrinking myself to fit their comfort. Just here. Healing. Building. Choosing myself, one piece at a time. Rylan asked me again over lunch one afternoon. As we sat on the patio of a sandwich shop near the college he was thinking about applying to. Do you miss them? Like, really miss them? I didn't answer right away. I took a bite of my turkey club, chewed, let the question sit in the air between us like something still deciding whether to land or pass through. I finally said, I miss who I thought they were. He tilted his head, confused. I leaned back in my chair and looked at the sky. Missing someone only makes sense if they were ever truly there. When you realize they weren't, what is there to miss? An illusion. He didn't say anything, just nodded like someone tucking away an idea to revisit later. I had been doing that a lot lately, dissecting old truths and holding them up to the light. Sometimes they cracked like cheap glass. Other times, they just disappeared, like smoke you thought was solid. Like the old college brochure I found last week, the one from that road trip Alara and I took when she was 16. She had dreams back then, real ones. Art school, traveling, opening a gallery. She fell asleep in the passenger seat with her headphones in and my jacket draped over her. I kept one hand on the wheel and the other on her dream, believing I was helping her build something that mattered. That little brochure had her scribbles in the margins. Ask about dorm size. Meal plans? And next to a photo of a brick building with ivy-covered windows, she wrote, looks like the future. I kept that brochure. Not because of the school, it was out of her reach the moment Grant re-entered her life and steered her toward practical paths. I kept it because of the moment, because of the way her hand had reached for mine during that trip, silent but sure. That squeeze had meant something, or at least I thought it did. But now, that same hand signed her wedding program and gave all credit to the man who returned when the work was already done. I tried not to dwell on that, but grief has a funny way of showing up even when you've already buried the relationship. It knocks on your door with familiar faces, old smells, a song on the radio, a dish you don't cook anymore because it was their favorite. And grief doesn't come alone. It brings questions. Like, was it ever real? Or, what did I miss? Or the most haunting one of all, was I enough? I told Rylan that it wasn't about being angry anymore. It was about being honest. And honesty hurts. It tells you things no one else will say, like how your place at the table was always conditional. Or how love sometimes comes with quiet expiration dates that only one person can see. Meanwhile, Marisol's life was unraveling. I didn't check in on her, but things have a way of floating back through shared acquaintances and the way people talk when they think you still care. Her new husband, Grant, the great reclamation project of her heart, had defaulted on a series of loans. I found out he'd leveraged Marisol's name on a few of them, tied up their joint accounts, and then fled with his assistant, a woman 10 years younger, someone who wore red lipstick and called him babe in public. He took more than money. He took the illusion, the neat story, the rewrite she tried to craft around him and Alara. It collapsed. She lost the house. Moved in with her sister Maritza, the same sister who once told me at a barbecue, "You're too good for her. You know that, right?" I'd laughed, shrugged, said, "We all have flaws." But now I understood what she meant. Marisol tried calling again. I didn't answer the first time, or the second. But one night, after 3 missed calls and one message that just said, "Please," I picked up. Her voice cracked through the phone like it had been holding back tears for weeks. "I didn't know you'd really leave," she said. I didn't say anything. Just let the silence speak for me. "I thought you were just angry, that you'd cool off. You always did before." And she was right. I used to. I used to walk into other rooms, breathe, and return ready to forgive. But I wasn't angry now. I was finished. And that's harder to argue with. "I didn't mean for it to get this far," she whispered. I thought about all the moments that meant nothing, all the small dismissals, the subtle realignments. The way she let Alara call him dad again without so much as a conversation. The way I was seated beside the sound tech at the wedding, as if the man who paid for the music belonged with the cables and wires. "You meant what you allowed," I said finally. "That's all I ever needed to know." She went quiet. A different kind of quiet than before. Not avoidance. This one sounded like regret. "Charles is gone," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "He emptied everything. He left me." I nodded, even though she couldn't see it. "And now I don't know what to do." I waited. Let the moment sit. "I'm sorry," she added. "But apologies this late only echo. They don't land. They can't. I hope you find peace," I said. She started to speak again, but I ended the call. Rylan was in the next room, oiling the hinges on the cabinet he just installed. I walked in, sat down beside him, and watched the way he focused. Intentional. Present. Something in that steadiness reminded me of who I was becoming. Not the man who chased, or who begged, but the one who stayed upright while the storm passed. "I ever tell you," I said, "that oak takes longer to bend than most woods?" He looked over, curious. "It's strong, stubborn, but when it does bend, it never breaks where you expect it to." He smiled. "Kinda like you." I didn't laugh. I didn't joke it off. I just nodded. Because maybe, finally, I was learning what it meant to grow back stronger in the places I used to fold. It was early evening when she showed up at my door. No warning. No call ahead. Just the sound of quiet knocking, 3 slow raps that didn't echo like a stranger's, but didn't carry the familiarity of someone who still belonged, either. I knew it was her before I even looked through the peephole. Some part of me still remembered the rhythm of how she entered rooms. It had once comforted me. Now it just made my stomach turn. I opened the door. Marisol stood there, smaller than I remembered. Not physically, exactly, but something in her had deflated. Her hair was pulled back in a loose bun like she hadn't bothered to brush it properly. Her blouse, once always crisp and tailored, looked tired, like it had seen too many apologies. She didn't wear makeup, not that I minded, but it was telling. She used to armor herself with lip gloss and mascara. Tonight, she came defenseless. I stepped aside. She entered slowly, eyes scanning the small apartment like it might bite her. She sat on the edge of my couch, barely using a quarter of the cushion, hands clasped in her lap, back straight like she was waiting for a verdict. I didn't offer her anything to drink. I didn't sit beside her. I remained standing by the window, hands in my pockets, letting the moment stretch. I didn't think you'd answer, she said quietly. I almost didn't, I replied. She looked down, nodding. I didn't know where else to go. There was silence again. Not the soft kind that lets people breathe. This one had weight to it. The kind you feel in your bones before it ever reaches your ears. She fidgeted with her wedding ring. Well, Grant's wedding ring. I hadn't seen it up close before. It caught the light like something bought too quickly, too loudly. I need help, she finally whispered, her voice almost breaking. I walked to the kitchen table, opened a drawer, and pulled out an envelope. It had been waiting there for a while. Inside were our finalized divorce papers. Signed. Notarized. Quietly completed 2 years ago when I realized the love I was holding on to was no longer real, just habit and hope stitched together with apologies that came too late. I handed her the envelope. She looked up at me, confused. What's this? Closure, I said. She opened it slowly, her fingers trembling as she scanned the first page. Her lips parted, but no words came out. Then finally, softly, she asked, You already signed these? 2 years ago. Her hands dropped to her lap. She stared at the envelope like it might change if she looked long enough. You were divorced, I said, the moment you stopped protecting me. Tears filled her eyes, but they didn't fall right away. She blinked hard, like she didn't want to give me the satisfaction. But I wasn't looking for that. I didn't want revenge. I didn't want to see her crumble. I just wanted it over. Clean. Done. I thought I had more time, she whispered. To do what? I asked. To keep me in the house as a placeholder while you rewrote our life around someone else? To let Grant slide back into the father role while I paid for your daughter's dreams? Time wasn't what you needed. You needed permission. And you gave that to him without hesitation. I didn't think it would feel like this, she said, tears slipping now. This empty. That's because you thought I'd stay, I replied. Even after everything. You thought I'd be here. That I'd come back when the dust settled. But I built a door too. And I closed it. She looked around the apartment. Her gaze paused at the stool in the corner, the one I built my first night here. Then at the photo of Alara and me on the windowsill. Her face softened. You kept that, she asked. I kept it for me, I said. Not for her. Not for you. She nodded slowly. I don't have anything left. You have yourself, I said. That's what you wanted, right? To be free of obligation, of compromise, of the man who kept making space even when you stopped showing up. I never stopped loving you, she said suddenly, voice tight. I shook my head. You stopped loving what came with me. The steadiness, the accountability, the presence. That kind of love makes people uncomfortable when they want chaos. She stood up then, slowly. I don't expect you to forgive me. I already did, I replied. But forgiveness isn't a reunion. It's just release. She stood there for another second, maybe hoping I'd say something else. Maybe hoping I'd crack, take her hand, rewind time. But I didn't. I walked to the door and opened it. A breeze drifted in cool, clean, indifferent. She stepped out without a word. I didn't close the door hard. I didn't lean against it or collapse into tears. I just locked it. One click. Final. Honest. Like a good lock always is. Later that night, I sat on the stool by the window and watched the world go dark. The lights in other apartments flickered on, curtains drawn, lives continuing. I poured myself a cup of tea and turned off my phone. I didn't need it ringing again. I didn't want another voice asking to rewrite history. I had written my own ending now, and I wasn't changing a word. The envelope sat on the table where she left it. She hadn't taken it with her. I didn't move it. I let it sit there like a tombstone for a version of us that died long before either of us said the words out loud. And when I turned in for the night, I slept the kind of sleep you only get after closing a door that should have been shut years ago. Her voice didn't match the number. I almost didn't pick up when it rang. It was a number I didn't recognize, area code from across the state. I let it go to voicemail the first time, but something about the silence that followed made me press redial. Maybe it was the way the number sat on my screen like an unopened letter. Or maybe, after everything, some part of me still wanted to know if she'd finally found the words. Alara speaking, she said, careful. Too careful. There was a pause before I answered. It's me. I expected her to fumble, to try and fill the space with 1,000 justifications. But all she said was, Dad. Just that. One word. One syllable. But it hit me harder than any insult she'd ever thrown with her silence. I sat back in my chair, the phone resting between my shoulder and cheek like I used to hold it during her high school crises, when she needed to vent about a teacher or ask for money for gas. Those calls felt like purpose. This one felt like aftermath. She was quiet on the other end. Then, slowly, she started to talk. About the marriage. About the man she thought she was getting, the fairy tale she signed up for. She said his name Charles, but it landed with less conviction now. Like she was still trying to believe it meant something. She told me about the fights, how he didn't listen when she spoke, how he'd shut down or walk out or tell her she was overreacting to things she could prove in black and white. He reminds me of him, she said softly, and she didn't have to finish the sentence. I knew who him was. I didn't say anything for a long time. I let her sit in that truth. It wasn't for punishment, it was for presence. So she could hear herself? So she could finally understand what it meant to see the signs and still walk toward the fire. I didn't call to ask for anything, she said. I just wanted you to know. I see it now. I closed my eyes, breathed in slow. Marriage is built in the quiet moments, I said. It's not the grand gestures. It's not the photos or the speeches. It's the silence. If silence feels like punishment, it's not love. It's control. She sniffled quietly on the other end. I didn't know what I was doing, she added. You didn't want to know, I replied. There's a difference. I didn't say it to hurt her. I said it because I needed her to live in the reality I had survived. For years, I had been the man who showed up, who paid attention, who knew her favorite cereal and the name of the stuffed rabbit she couldn't sleep without until she was 11. I was there for the college visits, the heartbreaks, the silent rides home from dentist appointments when she hated her braces and didn't want to talk. I showed up. And then, one day, I didn't matter anymore. Not because I failed, but because it became more convenient to forget. I keep thinking about the wedding, she said. About how you sat in the back. I didn't even, her voice caught. I didn't even look for you. I remembered that moment like it was stitched into the inside of my chest. Watching her walk down the aisle flanked by Marisol and Grant, the applause swelling, people leaning into the picture like they'd witnessed something noble. I was next to the sound technician, close enough to hear the static hum of the equipment but too far to be seen. I stood up then, walked to the closet, and pulled out a bag I had been keeping for months. Not because I wanted to deliver anything, but because I knew one day, maybe, she'd ask the question she never asked at the wedding. Were you even there? In the bag was a mason jar of soup I'd made that morning, a few vitamin packets I knew she liked, a journal with a soft brown leather cover, and a single photo. The wedding photo. Not the one taken professionally, but one I'd captured myself on my phone from the back row. In it, she was smiling. They were walking. I was in the distant background, blurry, barely visible, but I was there. I got in my car and drove to her place, a small condo near the train line. I didn't ring the bell, didn't knock. I just left the bag on the porch with a note attached to the photo frame. 3 words carved into the walnut edge. I was there. That was it. That was all I needed her to know. That even when she didn't see me, I showed up. Even when I was left out, I bore witness. When I got home, I sat at the table Rylan and I had built. My tea had gone cold, but I drank it anyway. There was something about the bitterness that felt right. Like a truth finally spoken. Later, she texted. No words. Just a photo of the frame, resting on her kitchen counter. She didn't need to say anything, and I didn't need to respond. Because this time, presence spoke louder than explanation. And for once, it was enough. I didn't recognize the number when it called. Just a string of digits. No name. No photo. Just a vibration against the table that I almost ignored. I'd learned to let calls go unanswered lately. People usually called for themselves, not for you. But something told me to pick up this one. Maybe it was timing. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was that old tether in my chest that never quite snapped, no matter how far I'd pulled away. Hello, I said, expecting silence or maybe a mistake. But then I heard her voice. Dad, that word didn't hit my ears. It hit my ribs. Hard. Like a hammer. The kind of word you don't expect to hear again. Not after being reduced to a footnote at her wedding. Not after being erased from her public life and thanked only in vague terms like those who helped me get here. I held the phone a little tighter. Alara, I said carefully. There was a pause on her end. Just the sound of breath and hesitation. I didn't think you'd answer. I almost didn't, I said. It was the truth. She let out a soft, broken laugh. Guess that runs in the family now. Another silence stretched between us, taut like string over a flame. I waited. I didn't save her from it. Not this time. I wanted to hear what she came for, not give her an escape route. She started, then stopped. I could hear her gathering the words like she was trying to build a bridge out of twigs. Things with Charles aren't great. Actually, they're really bad. I didn't say anything. She wasn't calling for advice. Not yet. She was calling to confess. I could feel it. He doesn't listen, she said finally. Like, ever. And I keep hearing you in the back of my head. All those times you said love isn't about grand gestures. It's about what people do when no one's looking. She sniffed. A quiet, painful sound. He forgets I exist when we're not in public. He's loud when it's just us. Dismissive. Cold. I'm sorry, I said, and I meant it. She cleared her throat. The worst part? He reminds me of him. She didn't have to say the name. I knew who him was. Grant. The man she let walk her down the aisle. The one she let reclaim the word Dad without protest. I felt something twist in me, something between grief and grim understanding. Cycles repeat when no one tells the truth. I thought I was doing the right thing, she said, voice cracking. I thought I was giving you space. I didn't know how to include everyone. I thought picking him would keep things easier. And did it? I asked. No, she whispered. It just made me lonely. The word lingered. I felt like I had to choose, she added. And people kept saying he was my real dad. And you, she stopped herself again. I didn't fight for the title, I said. I figured I'd earned it through actions. You did, she said. Quickly. Desperately. You did, Dad. That second time she said it, it broke something loose in me. Not tears. Not anger. Just a deep, aching release. I didn't realize how much I had missed that word. Not for ego. Not for credit. But for what it represented. Being seen. I'm not calling to fix anything, she said. I know I messed up. I just wanted you to know you were never a placeholder to me. You were, her voice caught. You were the safe place. And somehow, that landed harder than anything else. You don't have to explain it all, I said quietly. That's not why I picked up. Then why did you? She asked. I looked over at the framed photo on the windowsill. The one from her wedding. The one where I sat in the very back, next to the sound equipment, barely visible, just a sliver of gray suit and stillness. I'd kept that photo not because I wanted to remember the hurt, but because I wanted to remind myself of the truth. I showed up. Even when they didn't make space for me. Even when they wrote me out of the script, I stood in the wings, just in case the play needed saving. I picked up, I said, because I was always there. Later that day, I packed a small bag, nothing grand. Just some soup, vitamins, a scarf she once left at my old place, and a softbound journal with an empty cover. I drove across town to her house, an overpriced townhouse Charles had insisted on, all modern angles and no warmth. I didn't ring the bell. I just left the bag on the porch, tucked neatly to the side. But I did leave one thing at the very top. A photo. It was from her wedding. I had printed it in high resolution, then trimmed the borders. I was still in the background, barely visible. But this time, I framed it in polished walnut, strong, quiet, beautiful in its understatement. And I carved 3 words into the frame, just beneath the image where no one else might notice them unless they were really looking. I was there. That night, she texted me a single line. I saw it. Thank you. Nothing more. She didn't call again. Not right away. And that was okay. It wasn't about rebuilding something broken into what it used to be. It was about acknowledging that it existed at all. That it mattered. That I mattered. You can't rewrite history, but you can stop lying about it. And in that space, healing begins not with declarations, but with small, quiet truths. The next morning, I sat at my window, coffee warm in my hands, the sun cutting gently through the clouds. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vindicated. I just felt steady. For the first time in a long while, it felt like enough. I moved again. This time, it wasn't to escape. It wasn't because a marriage fell apart or because I had been edited out of someone else's story. It was a move I chose. Deliberately. A cabin in the woods, just past the bend where the road narrows and the trees lean in like they're whispering secrets only the quiet can hear. No neighbors. No footsteps above me. Just birdsong in the morning, wind that knows your name, and silence that doesn't accuse you of anything. The place needed work when I bought it. Most people would have walked away after seeing the cracked foundation and the crooked shutters. But I saw something else. A blank page. a space that didn't come with echoes of someone else's life. So I started slow, replacing boards, sanding floors, repainting walls. I built every piece of furniture myself, the chairs, a table, a headboard, even a small bench under the window where the sun hit just right in the mornings. That bench became my favorite place. I'd sit there each morning with coffee, staring out into the woods, watching the light crawl over the ferns like it was trying to forgive them for the night. The cabin had no Wi-Fi, barely any signal, and I liked it that way. I didn't need to know what Marisol was doing. I didn't care where Grant had run off to. I didn't need to track Alara's social posts or wonder whether my name would ever come up again. Peace doesn't ask for witnesses. It just waits to be chosen. Alara visited sometimes. Not often, but enough. She'd park a few feet from the cabin and walk the rest of the way, always carrying something: homemade cookies, a plant, once even a box of old family photos she said she couldn't throw away but didn't know what to do with. We didn't talk about the past in detail. We didn't rehash the wedding or the way she left me behind in favor of something that now rang hollow. We talked about small things, the kind of silence that lives between people who are rebuilding, not rehearsing. One afternoon, she sat on the bench with me, our legs almost touching. She looked out the window, her eyes distant but not cold. "Do you ever think about forgiving me?" she asked. I didn't answer right away. I sipped my coffee, watched the way the steam curled and vanished. "Forgiveness," I said, "sometimes looks like soup on a porch and a place to sit. But even that space has rules now." She nodded slowly. "Fair." We didn't say much more after that. She stayed another hour, then left with a quiet hug that felt more like gratitude than guilt. She never said she wanted me to come back into her life the way I used to be, and I never asked for that. Sometimes healing isn't about restoring what was. It's about respecting what remains. Marisol never called again. Not after the envelope. Not after the door. And I didn't reach out either. It wasn't hate. It wasn't bitterness. It was just done. Like ashes after a fire that no longer burned. I didn't check up on her, and I didn't wait to be checked on. Let her rebuild or unravel however she needed to. I had finally stopped thinking it was my job to save people who refused to stand beside me when it counted. On my nightstand, there's a photo frame, but it doesn't hold a picture of Alara. Not one of Marisol. Not even of Rylan or the wedding or the old life that once kept me running in circles. It's a picture I took myself, one quiet morning from that bench. It's an empty bench, lit by a soft spill of morning sunlight. No people, no ghosts, just the wood, the light, the quiet. I framed it in cedar and kept it beside me not as a warning, but as a reminder. That peace is not something you find, it's something you carve. Intentionally, patiently, and this time, no one gets to take it from me. The world I live in now is smaller, but it's honest. I make breakfast for one, and it's enough. I drink coffee without waiting, FO.